Have you ever heard someone deliver such a heartfelt speech that made you laugh, cry, applaud to the point where at the very end you'd say, I wish I could speak like that?
I don't even know if you smoke weed. You seem like a coke guy. And we miss you very much.
Now, Dave Chappelle gives you the playbook on how to do just that when he delivers a heartfelt tribute speech to his friend Jon Stewart after Jon won the Mark Twain Award. Let's break down the 6 key areas from Dave's speech to show you how you can deliver your own heartfelt speech in this week's edition of Speaker Film Study.
This might come as a surprise to many of you. I didn't prepare a speech. But that's not because I didn't care. In fact, it's because I cared so much. If you could imagine sitting down and trying to write something about someone that you feel so much about, the way I feel about Jon, it's very difficult.
He leans on 2 really critical aspects of persuasive speaking. We call that ethos and pathos. Ethos is leaning on credibility, authority, or shared knowledge to persuade your audience. Pathos is evoking emotion in your audience, and Dave does this beautifully by combining both when he says,
if you could imagine sitting down and trying to write something about someone that you feel so much about, the way I feel about Jon, it's very difficult.
He's transferring emotion to his audience by saying how much he deeply cares about Jon so they can feel that too. And he's leaning on this shared knowledge that it's extremely difficult for anybody to write about something so personal through a speech. Dave locks eye contact with Jon for at least 3 seconds, and you should do the same because there are 2 benefits. The first is it naturally gravitates your audience's attention towards your exchange with that individual so they're locked in even more. And the second is, particularly in a tribute speech, you're going to make the person that you're speaking so highly of feel that much more loved and appreciated because you care to speak to them as though it's a one-on-one conversation.
And me and Jon have a very unlikely friendship. The context of that friendship happened in a comedy club in New York City. Jon being 10 years my senior, I was 17. The first time I saw Jon Stewart, right before he walked in the door, I heard 2 waitresses at the club talking about how handsome he was. And then they go, oh my God, there he goes. And I looked over and I said, hey, he's all right.
There are 2 tips I have when it comes to setting the scene for your audience. The first is to use intriguing adjectives. When Dave said,
and me and Jon have a very unlikely friendship.
The word unlikely evokes a question in your audience's mind, which is, why is that? And there are several other intriguing adjectives you can use, like unusual, accidental, strange. But when you use extreme positive adjectives like happy or wonderful, it doesn't necessarily evoke that same question, why? The second key tip is to use the teleport tactic, and that means to literally set the scene such that your audience feels like they're in that room with you in that particular moment you're describing. Ways you can do this include giving very clear details, telling them exactly where you were in the story, and even reenacting dialogue between 2 people.
The early part of any comedian's careers is embarrassing in hindsight because so many of us imitate our influences or try on different personalities to see what works. But Jon he's been the same since the very first time I met him. Nice and present.
The art of giving a genuine compliment starts off with explaining what the norm is, and then for your particular subject, explaining how they deviate from the norm in a really positive way. When Dave says,
a lot of comics will take this genre for granted. The younger comics, they do what I call wokes. They're not jokes. They don't know the difference between a good point and a good joke. Jon is very true to the muse. He takes a good point and he makes a good joke of it. Jon is a miracle to watch you work. You are a cure to what ails our culture.
That's a much more powerful way of complimenting Jon than to just say, he's a really nice guy. When you're delivering a speech about somebody else, make sure that you lean on contrast. What's the norm behavior, which is either standard or subpar, and what is exceptional about this person in comparison to that norm?
And in 2002, suddenly, somehow, he became the most popular news show on television. Actually, I know how. He had a good lead-in, Chappelle Show.
The next thing Dave does really well is he makes himself look really good without stealing the spotlight from Jon. Now, he does this using the guess why method. The guess why method is essentially when you're setting up an intriguing scenario that makes your audience wonder, why is that? And then you slot yourself as the reason why that thing occurred. This is much more clever than just talking about yourself and praising yourself, because otherwise you'll come off as a bit selfish. Notice how he pauses too. Dave understands his punchlines, and by allowing your audience to react to the joke, you're actually gonna make them like you even more as a presenter.
During the pandemic, when my town was dying and I needed to help raise money to get the economy of the town straight, Jon was the first responder. He was terrified of COVID, and he got on a plane anyway after his friends had died. And we did shows that whole weekend. And every comic who came out there had been off for at least 100 nights. They were all nervous and they were all scared, except for Jon. Jon did 25 minutes off the rip because he had something to say.
One of the great ways that you can speak from the heart without ever needing a script when you deliver your next speech is to have a single line that summarizes the core message. For Dave, it's this.
I'm not here because I love Jon Stewart. I'm here because he loves me.
Now, this actually isn't a joke. It rather reflects that Jon would and has done anything to be there for Dave Chappelle. And then he just tells stories that reinforce that particular single message. If you're not able to articulate your message in a single sentence, then your audience won't be able to either. And your speech will just deviate into different directions without any real clear purpose. So it's really important that before you get on stage, understand what's the one thing that I want my audience to remember from my speech, not just weeks later, but months or even years later.
Just know, whenever you call on me, I will come, because you have been one of the greatest friends that I've made in 35 years. I'm honored that you got this award. I'm sorry I got it before you, but I'm your lucky lead-in. Jon Stewart, ladies and gentlemen.
Lastly, you want to conclude your speech by using the full circle moment. The full circle moment is when you take an element from earlier in your speech and you bring it up again at the end of your speech. Now, a great heartfelt tribute speech is not just about talking about your friend and how they should be remembered. No, it's actually about talking about your relationship with that particular individual and how that should be remembered. And the full circle moment does a great job of connecting you, yourself, the speaker, with your friend or that person that you're giving a tribute to. And this is so important because as an audience, we don't just want to hear about the other person. We care most about connecting with you, the speaker. And that's, again, pathos at work. Now, Dave Chappelle isn't the only comedian that you can learn public speaking tips from. Take a look at this breakdown of Adam Sandler's acceptance speech for winning the Mark Twain Award in 2023.